All right, diving right in today, we're tackling a really a heavy topic, but super important. We're talking about human trafficking and how the Catholic Church views it.
It's a big one for sure.
Yeah, we've got all sorts of documents here, like catechism, letters from popes, statements from bishops, the works, and our goal. We want to break it all down for you, help you understand what the Church really teaches about this. This is a worldwide problem.
Chably, yes.
And it's devastating. But what I find interesting about the church's perspective is that it's not just about laws. It gets into this really deep idea of like human dignity.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just looking at, opinions or political stances. We're digging into these core teachings that literally shape how millions of people view the world and act in it.
Totally. Okay, so first up, we got to talk about the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, for anyone who might not know, the Catechism is kind of like the ultimate Catholic guidebook. It's like, here's what we believe. And when it comes to human trafficking, it's pretty straightforward. What stood out to you like the most from its statement on this?
Oh, there's this one paragraph 2414. It just lays down the law, basically. It straight up forbids any activity that leads to enslaving people or treating them like products you can buy and sell.
Wow.
Yeah, and the language they use is really strong. It doesn't beat around the bush. It doesn't say it's discouraged. It says it's a sin, a direct violation of human dignity.
Like, whoa, this isn't just messing up a little. This is like a fundamental offense against what it means to even be human.
Exactly. And the Catechism, it goes even further, too. It gets into the whole mindset behind trafficking. It says that if you reduce someone to like just their work value, like they're some kind of machine, or if you only see them as a way to make money, that's a sin against their very rights as a person.
So it's like challenging that whole idea of dehumanizing people, which some might say is even worse than the actual act of trafficking. Like, if we start seeing people as objects, then is exploitation really that far off?
That's a really good point. And, it's not just the Catechism saying this. We see this strong condemnation from recent popes as well.
Oh, let's talk about the popes. I always find their perspective interesting because, they're not just spiritual leaders, right? They often weigh in on these massive global problems. Pope John Paul II, for instance, he didn't mince words in his 2002 letter on this.
No, he did not. He called human trafficking a shocking offense, a total violation of basic human rights, really. And he emphasized that it's sadly a global issue, something that's, woven right into globalization itself.
Yeah, globalization, it connects the world and all that, but as he points out, it has this dark side that we absolutely cannot ignore.
Yeah, totally. He's really pushing us to see that this isn't some faraway issue. It's deeply tied to, the complex forces that are shaping our world today.
Absolutely. Now, we also have Pope Benedict XVI, who in his 2006 message for, I think it was World Day of Migrants and Refugees, he linked migration to human trafficking. What's the connection there?
Well, he was highlighting how globalization, which again often is seen as a positive thing, can actually create vulnerabilities that traffickers exploit. Think about it. Mass migration, big economic differences between countries, people just desperate for a better life.
Mm-hmm.
All of these can make people easy targets.
Right, right. So it's like he's saying, look, progress has a price, and sometimes, unfortunately, that price is paid by the most vulnerable people in our society. Man, this stuff is heavy. But let's zoom out a bit, okay? We've got the Catechism and the popes both condemning this, no question.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this connect to broader Catholic ideas about social justice? I'm thinking about Gaudium et Spes, that document from Vatican II.
Ugh. Gaudium spes. That means joy and hope. It came out of Vatican II. That was this huge gathering of all these church leaders in the 1960s. They wanted to, modernize and really address the challenges of the modern world.
Yeah.
And that document, it's super relevant to what we're talking about. Why? Because it flat out condemns anything that violates human dignity.
Right, and it gets specific, too. It names things like awful living conditions, being imprisoned for no good reason, slavery of any kind, prostitution, those terrible jobs where people are just treated like tools to make money.
It's a pretty powerful list, and it connects to what the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, would later call out as a major factor behind trafficking consumerism.
Ooh, that's interesting. So if Gaudium et Spes is saying all those things are fundamentally wrong, and the USCCB is saying our demand for cheap stuff is what fuels these systems, then, whoa, that makes US complicit, right? As consumers, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely. It really pushes us to look at our role in the global marketplace, how our buying decisions affect other people's lives. And it's not just about awareness. It's about solidarity, too.
Wait, hold on. Before we get into solidarity, can we just define that word for everyone? It's easy to throw these terms around, but what does it really mean in this context?
Yeah, good point. Solidarity here means recognizing our shared humanity with the people who are being exploited. It's about going beyond just feeling sorry for them, charity,
Mm,
and understanding that we're all interconnected. What hurts one hurts us all.
I like that. It's not just, oh, that's sad, but it's like their struggles are our struggles too.
Exactly. And that understanding, that should push us to action. What are we actually doing to help those caught in these systems? How are we working to change those systems themselves?
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got this foundation of core Catholic teachings, but how does this actually work in the real world? What is the USCCB actually doing beyond just issuing statements?
Well, in 2007, they released a statement specifically called On Human Trafficking. And it's way more than just words. It's a call to action, urging us to tackle the root causes, especially consumerism, which we just talked about.
So it's like they're saying, okay, this is wrong, no question, now what are we going to do about it? It's not just about saying bad things are bad, it's about let's fix it.
Yeah. And they get specific. They call for holding accountable those who profit from trafficking, not just the traffickers themselves, but the whole network. Anyone who benefits from exploitation.
I'm guessing that includes businesses that know they're using forced labor, officials who look the other way, even us as consumers if we're demanding the cheapest prices without thinking about the human cost.
Yeah, you got it. They're challenging us to confront that whole system.
And it's not all talk either. They're actually working to fight trafficking on the ground, right? I remember reading about Bishop Wensky, who was leading their committee on migration and his commitment to this issue.
Oh yeah, Bishop Wensky, he's been incredibly vocal, reaffirming the church's commitment to working with the government to stop this, this scourge.
Yeah.
They see collaborating with the government as essential.
That's good to hear. It's not the church versus the government. It's realizing that this is a problem so big, so complex, we have to work together to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. They're calling on everyone, individuals, communities, governments to do their part. It's not a Catholic issue. It's a human issue.
That's a great point. So we've got the USCCB taking a strong stance, which is great, but this problem, it's global. What about other Catholics, other parts of the world? Are there other groups echoing these same ideas?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to look at what the Canadian bishops said, the ones from British Columbia and Yukon. They put out a letter in 2009, a pastoral letter on human trafficking. They touched on a lot of the same things, but they add something really important.
Ooh, okay, I'm interested. What's their take?
They really emphasize solidarity, which we talked about before, with the people who are exploited. It's not enough to just say trafficking is bad. We need to actually stand with the victims and support them on their path to healing.
I like that. So it's like, yeah, condemning it is important, but then what about the people whose lives have been shattered by this? How do we walk alongside them? How do we help them recover?
Exactly. And they remind us, too, that these victims are persons created in the image and likeness of God. They deserve love, respect, compassion.
Yeah, it's powerful. It reminds us that these aren't just numbers or headlines. These are real people whose lives have been completely messed up by this horrible crime, and they have inherent value simply because they're human.
And they also go a step further. They stress how important education is in this fight. Not just to make people aware of how trafficking works, but to challenge that whole mentality that allows it to happen in the first place.
So it's like getting to the root of the problem. If we can change how society views people so they're not seen as commodities, that's a huge step.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture that values human dignity above all else.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. I mean, it's incredible how consistently the church condemns this, from the Catechism to the popes to bishops all over the world.
It is, right.
Yeah.
And what strikes me is that it's not just talk. They're giving us a roadmap, saying, here's how we address the root causes. Here's how we support the victims. Here's how we fight for change. So it's like, look, this is hard, it's complex, but we can't just give up and say it's too big. There's hope, but it needs all of us working together.
I totally agree. And it's not just about saving people from trafficking. It's about changing society itself, making it so exploitation can't even exist.
Man, this has been eye-opening so far. We've looked at the core teachings, heard from different leaders, and even got a glimpse of what's being done on the ground. But I'm curious, for you personally, what's been the most impactful part of all this? What's the biggest takeaway for you? For me, it's that unwavering focus on the inherent dignity of every single human being. It's at the heart of all of the church's teachings about social justice, and it shines through in everything we've looked at.
I get that. No matter what your situation is, your background, anything, a person just is valuable and worthy of respect. And trafficking completely violates that truth.
You said it perfectly. And that understanding, it changes so much. It changes how we view not just trafficking, but all forms of exploitation. It's not just about laws. It's about a fundamental shift in how we treat each other.
That's a challenging message, but it's hopeful too.
Yeah.
And I think it goes way beyond just the Catholic Church, you know?
Right.
Anyone who believes in basic human rights can understand that.
Oh, definitely. It all comes down to human dignity.
Yeah.
That's a value that goes beyond any one religion or belief system.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Like, we've talked about the church's, their absolute condemnation of human trafficking. We've looked at the theology behind it, heard statements from leaders. But I'm really curious about what's actually being done about this, Like, what are the concrete actions the church is taking to actually fight trafficking?
Right. Yeah. That's where the real work is, right? Where the rubber hits the road, as they say.
Hmm.
And thankfully, the church's efforts are they're multifaceted. They're not just talking the talk. They're really involved in a lot of different areas, from raising awareness, educating communities, to actually supporting victims, and even pushing for policy changes.
So it's like a full-on approach then, attacking this from all sides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are so many Catholic organizations and religious orders doing amazing work. Many are directly involved in rescuing victims from these just horrific situations.
Mm.
Providing them with safe shelter, counseling to deal with the trauma, even job training so they can rebuild their lives.
Man, that's got to be tough work, but so inspiring to hear about. They're not just sitting back and saying, this is bad. They're getting their hands dirty, really getting involved.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And they're focusing on prevention too. By addressing those root causes we talked about earlier, a lot of Catholic charities are working to reduce poverty and promote economic development in communities that are particularly vulnerable to trafficking.
Right, that makes sense. If people have options, if they can provide for themselves and their families, they're way less likely to get sucked into these exploitative situations.
You got it. And on the policy side, the church has been really vocal, advocating for stronger laws against trafficking and better enforcement.
So they're not just working at the ground level, they're using their platform to try and change the system itself.
Exactly. They're talking to governments, international organizations, anyone who will listen, to promote policies that protect migrants, protect workers. It's about making life harder for traffickers and creating a world where exploitation is less likely to happen in the first place.
Sounds like they're covering all the bases. Prevention, protection, prosecution.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember, too, that all of this isn't just happening in Western countries. The church is fighting this all over the world.
It's a global problem. It needs a global response, for sure. That's powerful. Okay, but what about us as individuals? We've talked a lot about the institutions, the organizations, but what about everyday Catholics or, honestly, anyone who cares about this issue? What can they do to actually make a difference?
That's the question, isn't it? And the church is really clear. Every single person has a role to play in this. It's not just on the priests and nuns or these big groups. Everyone can contribute.
Okay, so what can people do in their everyday lives? What are some practical things?
Well, the first thing is education. Learn about it. Knowledge is power, you know the saying. Learn to spot the signs of trafficking, understand the tricks these traffickers use, be aware of the products and services that might be connected to exploitation.
Right, because once you understand the problem, then you can start making better choices.
For sure. And those choices, even small ones, can add up, like supporting businesses that are doing things ethically, that have fair labor practices. Maybe it's choosing fair trade coffee, or really looking into the supply chains of the clothes you buy. It might cost a little more sometimes, but you're aligning your actions with your beliefs.
It's like voting with your dollar, right? Putting your money where your mouth is.
Totally. And don't forget about local action, too. Almost every community has organizations that are fighting trafficking, and they need volunteers, donations, or even just people to spread the word.
Yeah, so get involved. Find those groups and lend a hand however you can. Local action can make a huge difference.
Huge difference. And even just talking about it is important. The more people who know about trafficking, the less likely it can hide. Share info on social media, talk to friends, family. Break the silence. Shine a light on this.
Raise awareness. Make it harder for traffickers to operate in the shadows.
Yes, exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions. Trafficking doesn't always look how you might expect. It can happen right under our noses, even in places that seem safe, well off.
That's kind of a scary thought. It reminds us to be watchful, to not look away no matter where we are.
You got it.
Hmm.
And don't forget about prayer either. The church really encourages us to pray for the victims of trafficking, to pray for their healing and freedom, and to pray for the strength to keep working towards a world where this just doesn't exist anymore.
I like that. It's recognizing that this isn't just a physical battle, but there's this whole spiritual side to it too.
Right. Prayer can be a source of hope, of strength. It reminds us that even small actions, when they're done with love and compassion, they can chip away at this evil.
This has been so eye-opening. We've covered so much. The church's teachings, what different leaders have said, the work that's happening on the ground, what individuals can do. It's amazing to see how the church is taking this on.
Yeah, they're in it for the long haul. They see this as an essential part of what they're all about, upholding human dignity and fighting for justice.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but it's encouraging to see the dedication, the compassion of everyone fighting against trafficking.
For sure. And their efforts are working. There are so many stories of survivors who have been rescued, who have been given a second chance, all because of the work these people and organizations are doing.
Those stories give me hope. They remind us that even in the darkest situations, the human spirit can prevail.
That's beautifully said. And it brings us to this really important point. The fight against human trafficking is about so much more than just enforcing laws or giving aid.
Ooh, now I'm really intrigued. What do you mean? What's the bigger picture?
It's about a complete change in our values. It's about recognizing that every single human being, no matter their circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity, with respect.
I love that. It's about changing hearts and minds, creating a world where exploitation is just like unthinkable.
Exactly. And that change starts with us, with each of us. It's
Yeah.
about looking at our own choices, challenging our own ideas, and taking action to build that world where this kind of suffering isn't allowed anymore.
That's a powerful call to action. And I think it goes beyond just what the Catholic Church teaches. It's a call to all of us, to humanity, to stand up and do what's right. So we've talked about the Church's teachings, what they're doing around the world, even what we as individuals can do. But before we finish up this deep dive, I want to go back to this idea of personal responsibility, because it's easy to hear about how big this problem is and feel like, well, what can I actually do? Does it even matter? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's easy to feel powerless when we're talking about these massive global issues. But I think what the church is saying about personal responsibility, it's actually really empowering. It reminds us that change happens because individuals decide to act one person at a time. And those actions, they can start right here, right now, in our own lives, our own communities.
So it's not like we all have to become superheroes and take down these trafficking rings by ourselves.
Huh. No, definitely not. It's about realizing we all have some influence, even if it seems small, and that we can make choices every day that match up with what we believe.
Okay, so what are some examples? Like, what can our listeners actually do to put this into practice?
Well, we talked about conscious consumerism earlier. Really think about where you spend your money. Are the businesses you support, are they paying their workers fairly? Are their supply chains transparent? Are they ethical? Sometimes, yeah, you got to do a little research, but it's worth it to know that you're not supporting exploitation.
Right. It's about putting your money where your mouth is, making sure your spending aligns with your values. Sometimes that means spending a bit more or going out of your way to find a company that's doing the right thing.
And it's not just about buying stuff. Think about the services you use, too. Like, are you aware of the potential for exploitation in things like hospitality, agriculture, domestic work? Are you asking questions about labor practices? It's being mindful of the people behind the services we all use and speaking up for fairness.
That's a good point. We don't always think about that hidden human cost. Okay, so beyond our spending habits, what else can we do?
Supporting organizations that work directly with victims is so important. You can donate to charities, volunteer your time, or even just help them spread the word in your community. Even those small things can have a big impact.
It's about putting our time, our money, our energy where our heart is.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about this, educating others. Talk to your friends and family, share stuff on social media, write to your elected officials, anything to break the silence. Get people thinking about this and making better choices.
So start conversations. Create a culture where exploitation just isn't acceptable anymore.
Yep, you got it. And remember, change starts with each one of us. The more people who know about this and are doing something about it, the more effective we'll be.
It's like that saying, think globally, act locally, be informed citizens, work for big changes, but also do what we can right here in our own little corner of the world.
Perfectly said. We can be both advocates and activists. working on multiple levels for a better, fairer world.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. We've explored the church's teachings on this, how they're fighting trafficking globally, and even what we as individuals can do.
It's clear that the church is absolutely dedicated to this fight. They see it as a core part of their mission, and they're not going anywhere.
And it can be overwhelming to think about how big this problem is, but seeing how dedicated, how compassionate all these people are, it really gives me hope.
Me too. And hopefully anyone listening today is leaving with a sense of hope and a feeling like they can make a difference. Because they can. Even small actions can add up to real change.
That's a great point to end on, I think. This fight against human trafficking, it's a fight for humanity. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity in every single person and saying no to exploitation no matter what.
Beautifully said. That's a message we should all carry with us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep fighting for a better world.